Zoom.
All right, welcome back. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I guess we can continue.
If you want to introduce yourself again.
Yeah,
Sure. So I'll just run through as quickly as possible. Okay.
it's fine.
All right. Again, I'm Steven Zafuto here from Obermeyer, Redmond, Maxwell, and Hippel, representing the owner and applicant, Universal Building and Construction, Inc. This is with regard to the application for 1273 Lindenhurst Road. I'm here with Heath Dumack, who is the surveyor and engineer for this application. The application is proposing to subdivide one existing lot into 3 residential lots. There's currently an existing house and outbuildings. Those will remain on lot 1, and lots 2 and 3 will be created as additional single-family dwelling use lots with pools. The applicant has previously obtained variances from the zoning hearing board related to this plan. There was one variance granted with regard to the density to increase the amount of dwelling units per acre. And another variance was granted to allow the building setbacks to be measured as the standard building setbacks from the property lines and from the ultimate right of way, instead of from the limits of the resource protected land on the property. Both of those were granted, as noted, subject to some conditions, which will be on the final plans. We're now working through the land development process. We've had some review letters and responses with the township. Heath Dumack will go through those, as well as through the waiver requests related to this application. But before we get into that, are there any questions from the commission?
I just to help me make sure I understand, what were the 3 things that you're going to end up addressing on the final plan? The conditions of the waiver, the variance.
Sure.
The first condition imposed was that the historic house that's going to be retained on lot 1 will be preserved and not demolished.
Okay.
The applicant would also use best efforts to maintain the integrity of the existing barn structure on lot number 1. And then a conservation easement in the form of a recorded declaration of restrictions will be filed a record to preserve the remainder of the undisturbed natural resources, which can and will be enforced by the township.
If I can ask, Barb,
Right, use yours.
getting some happy feedback? Good. All right, good. Okay, is the stone wall at the base of the driveway of the existing property considered part of the existing structure and under the protected order to preserve?
No, they were just talking about the house and the existing barn.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there's no other questions. We'll have Heath do his presentation.
Sure. Can we put the rendering back up, please? And Jim, I have a handy dandy laser, but I would assume that you're going to want to follow along with a cursor. So I'll try to be as abbreviated as possible. The site itself is on the westerly side of Lindenhurst Road. It is has the existing farmhouse, and there's a barn to the rear of the site. This is lot 1. And then lot 2 and 3 are proposed as 2 new homes with schematic pool design for future. Both new lots will be covered with underground ballast pits or storm systems. Yep, one for lot 2 and one for lot 3. Testing has occurred, infiltration testing has been evaluated. The township engineer has reviewed the results. They were submitted. We got a review letter from Remington and Vernick last fall, We have revised the plans, resubmitted them, and the review letter from Remington and Vernick dated February 3rd is the current review. In a nutshell, I can go line item by line item through that letter. Okay, page 1 is basically a synopsis of the project. Page 2 is section H is the beginning of the comments. Do you want me to read each one of these, or can I say which ones are will complies and really focus on?
Yeah, I guess if you're going to comply, that's all you really need to say, right?
Yeah, if you're going to comply, just say that. If there's something you want to highlight or note for everyone, or where there's maybe ambiguity,
Certainly.
mention those.
Well, items 1 through 14, aside from item 5, are all will comply. Item 5 is a waiver, which is actually in the waivers request, which is on the next page, page 3. We do know that we need to do a NIPD's permit. That's item 3. We are in excess of 1 acre of disturbance. The dry wells themselves are fed with a series of smaller pipes, anything from an 8-inch to a 15-inch diameter. We will be asking or are asking for a waiver. The majority of these pipes realistically are downspout leaders, et cetera. And we don't need, or we feel that we don't need an 18-inch diameter pipe for a downspout leader.
I would support that waiver.
Thank you, sir. Going through the stormwater report, which are items 10 through 14, they are all will complies. I believe these items are more housekeeping issues than anything substantial. Going to page 3.
Sorry, I'm sorry. If I can just stop for a second.
Yes, sir.
So 10 through 14, you are requesting waivers but you're telling me you will comply. So we're withdrawing the waiver request, or am I misreading?
No. Items 10 through 14 are not waiver requests. They're all will complies.
On the comments.
Yes,
Understood.
right.
Except for comment 5, which is a waiver. request.
Yes. And that we'll get to in section 4 shortly. Section 3 were the granted variances from April 19th of 2022. Getting into section 4, which are the requested waivers. We have, and I apologize, 12 waivers. And I can go through each of them specifically. Item 1, section 178-12B, to not require a separate preliminary and final submission. Our opinion is that the project itself is of minor magnitude and that we can move forward with the project as preliminary as final, not separate submissions and separate reviews.
We would support that waiver.
Thank you again, sir. Item 2, section 178-19, to not require the submission package as specified by this section and instead as stipulated by the township. I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure what that waiver request is for, but it was itemized. I believe that we do need it.
Our ordinance is not caught up to what we want in the way of submissions. So we don't want 25 sets of plans, reports, and everything. We prefer minimal amounts of paper and everything in electronic format.
Okay.
Um,
This is one essentially we're at.
That is correct.
Awesome. Item 3, section 178-20B, to permit a plan scale of 1 inch equals 30 instead of the required 1 inch equals 100, to permit grading and stormwater plans to be at a scale of 1 inch equals 30 instead of a required 1 inch equals 50. The site itself, as previously discussed, it's a small site. To go to 1 inch equals 50 or 1 inch equals 100, you're going to need a microscope to see the detail.
So it's to our benefit to have these plans at a higher resolution and a.
Yes, sir.
Perfect.
Similarly, item 4, section 178-26.
If I may interrupt, waiver request number 3, I do not believe is needed because the ordinance says that the plan shall be not less than 1 inch equals 100 and 1 inch equals 50. And the way I interpret that is.
Smaller is better. Well,
Yeah,
it
it can't be a 200 scale, which
Okay.
is a larger number, but it is a smaller scale. So I believe that waiver request number 3 is actually not required.
I will not argue with that. Item 4, section 178-20C6, to allow 1-foot contours instead of the allowable 2-foot contours. It's an administrative, the 1-foot contours give a better resolution. Item 5, item 5, I'm
Do
sorry.
you want to check and make sure that that's also a no less than?
I just did check. It does say 2 feet. And that's something that actually, quite frankly, we've never noticed on plans before. But that's something we need to clean up. And I think, as I've mentioned to a few people, my goal sometime early this year is to go through the entire saldo and clean up all of the leftover items that are maybe out of date.
Item 5, section 178-20C9, to not require existing buildings and their uses, driveways, sewer lines, storm drains, culverts, bridges, utility easements, quarries, railroads, and other significant man-made features within 200 feet of the site be shown. We are presenting an aerial photo on the plan set. I have a hard copy here this evening. It's the cover sheet, and you can show the cover sheet on Zoom as well. Item 6, section 178-40A, to permit the existing right-of-way and cartway widths to remain. For us to go to the ultimate right-of-way for Collector Road, I believe the required width is 80 feet. You're going to be creating a small jut out of excess width, and the remainder of Lindenhurst up in, north and south of here will not have that. To some extent, it's going to start creating hazards with widened areas and then narrowed. I would prefer seeing that the existing right-of-way and cartway width remain as is.
So
And it should,
Jim, go ahead.
it should be noted that at the time that Lindenhurst Road was reconstructed in the 1990s, I believe it was, PennDOT came through and they acquired right-of-way from this property and a number of others. So this ultimately is the ultimate right-of-way that PennDOT envisioned for this road going forward, and there's no need for the township to have a fake right-of-way, so to speak. And I believe the existing right-of-way that PennDOT acquired back in the 90s is sufficient for all purposes needed.
Okay, item 7, section 178-47A, to not require sidewalks. There are no sidewalks at least within 1,000 feet south of this site and in excess of that distance north.
Did have a question about this one. So I understand there's no sidewalk today, but you are improving and changing the property and the land. I believe that expanding sidewalks throughout the township is one of the stated goals. And it would seem appropriate to take an opportunity when someone is going through a construction project, if it's in the code, to talk about, should we move forward rather than making the taxpayers pay for that sidewalk at a later date? Should we decide a year from now, 18 months from now, it's time to place sidewalk on Lindenhurst? So I wanted to just bring that up as a point of discussion.
Yeah, we've had a few of these conversations about sidewalks. I think that my initial response personally would be, we kind of cover that, right? With a fee in lieu of or a sidewalk, right?
Yeah, another alternative besides a full waiver is to have them provide money so that if in the future it does become practical to hook in that sidewalk to do so, or let's say if we did something just across the street where these people can cross the road and get to a sidewalk to go somewhere, that a fee in lieu of would be appropriate in order to help pay for the sidewalk.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I'm fine with the fee in lieu on, I mean, I don't think there's any other sidewalk in.
No, I say, yeah, it's like 1,000 feet.
Yeah, so it's one of those situations we've seen
Yeah.
where it makes no sense to put it in, but the fees certainly make sense.
My in that situation, I don't know, Dawn or TJ, do you have anything on this?
I'm good so far.
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, if there's no sidewalks there, but there's potential in the future to have the the fee.
And given, in my perspective, given the seeming priority the Board of Supervisors has been consistently pushing on sidewalks the last few years. It has definitely been a priority for the board. I would probably I would recommend make that a fee in lieu of. And it sounds like most everyone else is agreeing with me.
For the record, and because it is relevant in some other issues here, Heath, do you want to discuss some of the issues with the property with the feasibility of actually, the actual sidewalk?
Sure. Can we go back to that rendering and focus a little more on the lower portion of the plan, which is the area around Lindenhurst? And I apologize. Yep, thank you. Specifically, as you look at what is lot 1, we start ramping up in elevation. I believe, sir, you made a point about that retaining wall. And the south side of the retaining wall in this vicinity is plus or minus 4.5 to 5 feet high. It really would be impractical to put a sidewalk on that side of the street. However, quite honestly, and you can see it in the grading plans, but the eastern side of Lindenhurst is actually developed and, for lack of a better description, flat and level, which would make more sense for a sidewalk location. So from our perspective, the client has acknowledged he's fine doing a fee in lieu, but realistically, the sidewalks would work better on the other side of the street, respectfully.
I think that's fair.
Next item, item 8, section 178-93 F3C, to allow the use of 8-inch, 12-inch, and 15-inch pipes instead of the required 18-inch pipes. 8 and 9 really kind of correlate together. The smaller diameter pipes, for the most part, are downspout leaders and low volume pipe flows. Trying to put an 18-inch pipe for a downspout leader underground pipe is kind of nuts. Likewise, HDPE pipe, the plastic flexible pipe, is designed to have the capacity to have a foot of cover over it, as opposed to concrete, which normally requires 2 foot. So items 8 and item 9, section 178-93 F3H kind of relate together.
If I could ask on item 8, totally makes sense. We don't want to convert a downspout into an 18-inch pipe once it hits the dirt, right?
Yes, sir.
But just to be clear, you're not requesting permission to use an 8-inch pipe in any place in which the code required 18-inch pipe would be appropriate for drainage.
We are not looking for the 8-inch to do that, but we do have larger pipes, the 12 and the 15-inch, which are utilized. The water conveyance is nominal in size. So we are asking for the larger of our range for yard inlets and things of that nature. We're not carrying the Delaware River through these pipes, no.
Yeah, and our ordinance was sort of set up for pipe systems and roadways and conveying water to large detention basins. And in that case, we preferred to have the 18-inch pipe so that you had plenty of carrying capacity to channel that water down into a detention basin. With the newer on-lot systems, that isn't as necessary.
Thank you. The next one would be item 10, section 174-12K, to not require a minimum 24-hour stormwater detention. The volumes of water that we're containing are so small that, quite honestly, we can't keep the water in the subsurface system for 24 hours. The infiltration rate is reasonable enough that it is flowing. And I'll be honest, I don't want to suggest using a bentonite clay or attempt to compact the subgrade down to reduce the infiltration rate. You can do it. I don't want to jinx it. I'd rather keep the infiltration rates the way we have it.
The other thing too is, the intention of that is to detain the stormwater so that you're not infiltrating it so fast that you're creating a sinkhole. And I think that with the infiltration rates that are on site and the amount of volume that you're infiltrating, that would not be a potential risk in this situation. So
Thank you.
So just to be clear, Andy, you're saying that you support that waiver request?
Yeah, I would.
Thank you.
The next waiver is item 11, section 178-85H4A, to not provide all 69 replacement trees on site. We are providing 38 replacement trees on site and are looking to provide a fee in lieu for the remaining 31 trees as per section 178-85H4D.
Question about this. You had mentioned earlier that there was one of the conditions of the of your variances was there's a conservation easement.
Yes.
Where is that on that background?
Tony, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had mentioned that the applicant had mentioned that earlier. One of the conditions of the variances that they got was creation of a conservation easement. And I'm wondering where on the map the conservation easement is.
You won't find it because we haven't shown it yet.
Okay, where's it going to be?
The proposed, well, if we go back to the rendering. Basically, what I'm looking at is the buffer plantings towards the rear of the 3 lots, which also, aside from being larger mature trees, is, oops, in this area in here and along, I'll call it the southerly line with the adjoining detention basin next door.
Oh, is there more on the back of the 3 properties as opposed to the southerly line? I guess that's the,
Yes,
are there, is there room for additional trees to go in there?
there is. But quite honestly, our landscape architect at the time went with the 38 trees and did not necessarily want to overcrowd everything based on mature growth.
I get the question I have on that is between the fee and the planting of the trees, how does that differ from what our code calls for? Does our code not call for some combination of the two?
I think it actually does. That's kind of what we're.
So does this meet? This meets there are essentially our requirements. That's my question. Does this meet our requirements? That's the way it reads to me on the surface. It may.
Actually, I believe they're correct. If the calculation on the plan is correct, then this would not be a waiver request.
There you go.
All right, we are from 12 down to 10. I like it. Yes, we're on a roll. Sorry. Item 12, the last one, section 178-20G, do not require an environmental impact assessment. The site itself, we have not asked for a single variance with regards to resources, steep slopes, woodlands. Everything that we've done is based on zoning and the saldo. So we are asking for relief from having to do an EIA.
I would indicate also that they've provided a lot of the information that typically would go into an EIA, whether it be a soils report, infiltration testing, clearance letters from the Pennsylvania Natural Diversity Index. And I think that's the Fish and Boat Commission and the Historical Commission. So they've provided a lot of that information. So I don't see that as being a major ask as far as a waiver is required.
Okay, and I get the only thing for me personally that jumped out at me, and this may be totally not germane at all, but we have a specific variance for the setbacks to be different next to a protected area.
It's the way the ordinance reads is when you have a mapped area, of say steep slopes, the requirement is that you have to set your setback based on the limit of that steep slope. All right. We're not disturbing anything in excess of what we're allowed to disturb. But, as an example, if we do have some irregular steep slope areas, specifically along the frontage, where the retaining wall is and along Lindenhurst itself. And what that would do is force the front yard setback even further back. In some instances, not allowing potentially a building lot.
Okay. All right, yeah, because that was essentially the gist of my question was with what Andy said, the information provided. I just wanted to clarify or confirm that any sort of environmental impact from changing that was covered in the variance and or some whatever was part of the application that Andy was referring to before.
Yes, sir.
And I wanted to make sure Jim and Andy confirm that for me.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
If I could ask just one more clarifying question on the EIA. So we're putting two structures, we're changing stormwater retention. There's a lot around permeable surface and water retention. We're pretty close to Core Creek, right? So I just want to make sure that the township is comfortable that those changes don't need to be reviewed or captured in any other way. What we have received gives us comfort that we don't have to look further at that impact.
It does, and I would say that they've provided a detailed stormwater management report to demonstrate that they've met the township water quality requirements and the rate of runoff requirements. And we have some comments regarding the stormwater report that will comply. And there would be sufficient room on site if they had to expand either one of those on-lot stormwater management systems to kind of comply with some of our comments. So we're confident that there's adequate resources on site to address those.
And since we are requesting preliminary and final at the same time, we would still have the opportunity to review that they did comply with those standards regardless, right? So that's what you
Sure.
said, we could revise. Okay.
Yeah, that's before we sign the record plan, basically.
Thank you, Andy.
Sure.
There are 4 other review letters. We have the Bucks County Planning Commission, which pretty much summarized the Remington and Vernick letter. We have the Fire Service Director, who basically found everything acceptable. Ebert Engineering is your sanitary or sewer engineer through Aqua. We have his review letter and everything there is a will comply. We have to comply with that in order to get our sewer service. The last item is the Lower Makefield Police Department, and it was the traffic safety suggestions. And basically what they've commented on is that since the frontage is overgrown and heavily vegetated, that the trees be limbed up and the brush be removed in order to improve the line of sight, and everything there we agree with, and it's a will comply.
Heath, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be part of any, because it's a state road, PennDOT would be reviewing that as well.
That is correct. PennDOT does still need to review. We will be applying for 2 driveway permits, 1 for each lot. And PennDOT has the ultimate say in how those driveways get configured.
And then I just have one quick question, Mr. Dumac. The traffic engineer's review letter also assesses the impact fee calculated at $6,452. There's no dispute over that, is there?
I don't have a copy of that letter, but I'm going to nod my head and say, no, we're good.
Okay,
Actually, Barbara, there's a letter of July 18,
that's what I'm
2020.
looking at.
That actually says $6,452.
Isn't that what I said?
I thought you said 2,000. I'm sorry.
No, I heard the 6.
Okay, my mistake.
Yeah.
I would have loved the 2. And that's a will comply as well. I apologize. For some reason, I don't have a copy of that letter.
Okay. All right. Anyone have any other comments? Concerns, thoughts?
So to summarize, we're down 2 waivers, so we're at 10, not 12, much more manageable.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, because so which ones we knocked off 12, right? Was that it?
No.
No,
No.
hold on.
It was 11.
11.
And 3.
11 and 3. And I think, and I also thought we were kind of in agreement that on number 7, we're gonna do a fee in lieu of for the sidewalk.
Correct.
Yes,
Yeah. So that covers 3 of them.
but we still need, the ordinance does not necessarily say fee in lieu. So it's still a waiver of the sidewalks.
Okay,
Contingent upon.
right, that would be our recommendation. Yes.
Sounds good.
All right. So I guess, Barb, do you want to wordsmith this one?
I would, but do you want to check to see if there's any members of the public that have comments?
Oh,
first?
that's good. Thank you. Is there any public comment? No public comment. Okay,
So if the commission were inclined, the recommended motion would be a motion to recommend approval of the proposed preliminary and final subdivision and land development plan of 1273 Lindenhurst Road, subject to compliance with all of the township professional review letters, with the exception of the waivers requested as more fully set forth in the review letter from Remington Vernick dated February 3rd, 2023. For those items listed as waivers, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 12. As to the waiver for the sidewalks, the board could recommend approval subject to payment of a fee in lieu of installation of the sidewalks, and further indicate that the zoning hearing board conditions imposed at the time of the approval of the variances be placed on the final plans for recording.
okay. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay. Okay, so just last time, any last words on this? I think we kind of covered everything, but let's make sure.
I'm
Dawn?
sorry, can I just go back to the waiver 11? Where do we leave that exactly? What about the trees?
I think we determined that it's not an actual waiver because they're complying with
Oh.
our,
Yeah, they can either plant the trees or alternatively do the fee, and they've done the combination, so they are compliant.
so they're just doing, usually someone comes in with a request doing one or the other, and they're kind of going in between. Plant some of the trees and pay for the rest of them.
Okay.
Okay. All right, if there's no more. Call the question. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any nays? All right, it's 5-0.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank
I do
you.
appreciate your time on this.
Appreciate it. Okay. All right, so I guess then the only other item we have is the open space ordinance discussion. Jim has some updates based on some of our last discussions that you'd like to go through. Jim?
Yes, you may recall at our last meeting, there were some questions. Primarily, they're centered around, well, what could the potential impact be on potential development sites? I actually went through and looked at a number of different properties of different sizes, shapes, configurations, and having resources of different sizes and shapes. And let's run through a couple of them real quickly with you. But the bottom line is that there's not a great deal of difference in the density for a project. I know we have one project. Not sure if you can see that. Zoom up a little bit. One property I know that was mentioned was the Fieldstone or Harris property. I did the calculation for what would be permitted under our existing zoning. When you take out the natural resources that are on the site, you're left with a certain net buildable site area. And then when you apply the density that's under our current ordinance, you can get anywhere from 36 to 39 lots out of it as a by right plan right now. And they'd still have to do something with the dump that's out there. That's still sort of hanging out there. If you go and use our open space ordinance, then 25% of that would be mandated to be open space. And that would net about the same amount of lots. And I did that same calculation. If you had 30% open space, it's roughly those same numbers. If you went to 40% open space, 35% open space, the numbers basically don't stay the same. So the net of this on most properties that are in the R2 zoning district is that there literally is no change in density. All we get is more open space, and there are smaller lot sizes. One of the benefits of this, and I did a calculation on it, is that by using a minimum of 25% open space, you potentially reduce the amount of impervious surface that would be generated by a project by anywhere from 10 to 25%. So, and that's one of the benefits of clustering. That's, and it's actually a benefit to the developer too, in that they have less amount of roads, pavement, driveways, everything you could think of to it. So that's basically the net effect on one.
Okay, let me ask a question about this one. Like, I'm looking at the 40% one. The 15.65 acres buildable area, that includes roads and lots? Or is that just, is that 35, is that the 15.65 acres divided by 35?
The 15.85 acres includes roads and detention basins. And that's why these numbers of density they're always a little bit inflated. I think I mentioned before,
Yeah,
like 10%, because you do have to account for roads and detention basins.
I still think in this thing, maybe I'm jumping ahead, so tell me to be quiet. I'm fine with that. But I still feel like there should be a floor on, R1's different than R2's different than R3, but I still think there should be a floor for how tightly you can pack. No matter how much open space you're given. I showed, like, if you take the roads out of that, now you probably, I'm making a number up, like, okay, now you're down to like 15 or 13 acres of buildable spots, and you're putting 30 in a house. You're getting now into quarter acre or third acre lots, which may be okay in R2. I don't know. I don't know what those numbers are. And I just like, at what point is it where no, these are too packed together?
Yeah, basically the numbers wouldn't be any different than, in this case, if you look at Yardley Hunt across the street, they'd be comparable to the size of those.
Yeah, but even like, couldn't you theoretically take this? You could, on paper, you could take this down to the nth level where it's just a bunch of houses built right next to each other like townhomes.
No, it basically it mimics what we already have in a number of areas in the R1, R2. Like I had mentioned, in the R1 zoning district, the northern end of the township, we have the farmland preservation lots, although that's theoretically a net 1 acre lot. Since we saved half of the farmland, they go down to lots that are a third of an acre to half an acre. And those are selling for close to $1 million for smaller lots.
I'm glad people are getting money for their houses and everything. And I just go back to, again, this is more a question. We came up with the different R1, R2 business districts and everything because in the master plan, we wanted some input into what the sort of environment is like. And all I'm keep pushing back on this is the spirit of this, I totally understand and I totally agree with. I just say at some point, other factors should come into play. And if you're building something that doesn't belong, not you, but if somebody comes and says, uses this, and say, great, we're gonna have a strip of woods here, but there's gonna be a block of houses that really was not the intent to be in like R1 per se, or R3 or whatever, then I'm just, that's the only reason. I just want to protect the township from somebody taking this a little bit too farther than what we'd attended.
I hear what you're saying, and I just.
Maybe I'm
wish-
making too much of it.
No, I don't think you are, but I want to just add here, we've discussed this ordinance at like 3 or 4 separate meetings. Last time it was before us, we were told there were going to be significant changes and we are going to get it back. We just got this tonight as we're sitting here. There's some red line changes on it. I can't tell if,
The red line is what you previously had,
well, okay, so what's new?
the stuff highlighted in yellow,
Only the stuff in yellow is
only the stuff in yellow.
Okay, so it begs a lot of questions because we left a lot of open issues when we've discussed this the 3 or 4 other times. And just in thumbing through this real quickly, I can't tell if any of them have been addressed. Or if all of them have been addressed.
What were those open issues?
And so we had, in particular, the last time we discussed this, there was a significant discussion about what was permitted with regard to the 25%. Was that in addition to or inclusive of resource protected land? And we heard things from, I think it was either you, Jim, or Barbara, that would suggest we couldn't do 25% plus resource protected land because it could be the case that maybe 25% of the property is already resource protected. So you'd be saying 50% of the land would be not developable under this ordinance.
Yeah, that is correct.
And is that addressed in here?
And
is it
I haven't
okay.
finished everything,
Okay,
but
no, but is
that's
that,
fine. But
because it's
that
not in the
point-
yellow highlighted language.
right, because that is something I think, I forget who came up with that idea that couldn't we take whatever the resources are and then add another 25% on top of that? That basically squeezes it down so far that you're basically taking away a developer's right to use their property, and it's just unworkable.
Right. So something we could not do.
Cannot do it.
Okay.
I looked at all the scenarios, and I was going to run through like another scenario where that plays in.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to clarify that because if I recall correctly, Supervisor Weiss was pushing for that or thought it was a good idea. Maybe pushing is not the right word, but thought it was a good idea at least. And if it's not something that's capable of being enacted, then I'm glad it's not in here. Okay, so there was also the issue of open space, how it was defined, who's responsible for it, how do we prevent encroachment? Because if you go through all the developments in this town, you could look at any number of them, and there's open space that's designed into the developments. And within a very short period of time, there's all kinds of encroachment. And it happens. We all have neighbors that do it. And or know people who have done it. And what can we do to prevent that in this scenario? Because in this scenario, it's going to be a big chunk of land, and it may be easier for those folks to even encroach more so than in a typical neighborhood built without this ordinance in place.
And this is something that the problem we have is mainly with developments that are older, where we didn't have anything in place to say you have to somehow demarcate that area, whether through signage, fencing, monumentation. We basically said, well, here's the area you can't go into, and then we hope that people don't go into it. We now have in place in our ordinance, and actually we did this 15 years ago, so newer developments are a lot better controlled, and we haven't had those issues in the newer developments. But in that, we actually lay out that you have to have it marked in some fashion that we could tell where that open space begins and ends. And we've also come up with a policy to defend against encroachments into those areas. We established a policy sometime last year. We now look at aerial photos to ascertain whether or not people have encroached into our area. And we have identified a number of people who've had to remove stuff out of the open space that they put in there.
So is there an ordinance about that, or it's just a policy?
Well, that is a policy, our defense against encroachments policy. There is an ordinance that lays out what is required for a subdivision land development for open lands. And if you give me a minute, I can just pull that up. Okay. I'll just reshare my screen in a second. This is chapter 178-87A. And then if you go to 2, we have in the ordinance, we've written in that the applicant shall provide a method of physically delineating private lots from open space areas. Such method shall include shrubbery, trees, markers, or other methods acceptable to the township. And the goal was to kind of somehow mark that out. So we didn't have just lawn that goes into more lawn that people can just start cutting the grass further and further out, which we've observed in a number of developments. And actually, most of that stuff happened literally like 25 years ago on the ones that we have an issue with.
Walk around the town, you'll see there's maybe in the more newer developments, there's a better barrier, but you don't have to go that far back in time to see encroachment.
Yeah.
It's there. But I'm glad there's at least an ordinance that says what that does. So thanks for pointing that out.
No problem.
And I'm also glad to hear that we've addressed the issue of going more than 25% with resource protected land.
Yeah, and I know one of the other items that had come up was the definition of open space. We have several definitions sprinkled throughout our open space or throughout our ordinances. And basically I looked at that and they weren't that inconsistent, but there was a slight inconsistency there. And so I basically went ahead and hopefully you can read that. It's a little bit blurry with the yellow and the red. But basically, I took the definition that was within our subdivision land development, which is pretty similar to the one that's currently in our zoning. And it's basically open space is an area of land or of water or a combination of land and water within a development site designed and intended for the use or enjoyment of residents, not including streets, parking areas, areas set aside for facilities, including detention and retention basins, or resource protected lands. So open space shall not include land occupied by commercial, industrial, residential, or other non-recreational uses, land reserved for future parking areas for non-recreational uses, stormwater management facilities, wastewater management facilities, and or the lots or lots of dwelling units. And then open space shall not include leftover areas, remnants of land remaining after allotted out, or other usable areas. And that's kind of that came from our subdivision land development ordinance. And I combined the second section of the one definition with the other. So it's clear under zoning what we allow for as open space.
And I have a question, just a point of clarification, I guess, on that. When it says like for use enjoyment of residents, does that mean anything deemed open space can be used by any resident?
No, not necessarily. The residents could be the people who live in it could be in their backyard, and it's for their benefit. If you have a homeowners association, it could be for the benefit of those people who live within that development. It could be the residents as a whole. If you left open a piece of land along a road and put trees up as you're driving by, it is to the enjoyment of the residents. So it's sort of a catch-all phrase.
All right, yeah, I mean, just ask that question because it might, as we, we're down to like the last few percent of, developable land and in the township, just the stage of our life cycle that we're in. And we're calling things open space because we want people to feel like, hey, we're making sure we're protecting what, like somebody said, the farm up on Yardley Newtown Road. If they go take advantage of this and there's, 40 acres of open space that we tout, and somebody from my neighborhood goes over there and just decides to walk around, but the residents say, no, this is just for us. How do we make sure that's clear to everybody?
there's a simple answer. You've got to have consistent definitions throughout all your ordinances of what open space is and what residences are, who are
Yeah.
residents. And I mean, I don't think you can stick in a different definition here that's a combination of other definitions. You've got to have consistency, because that's the first thing anybody, whoever's going to attack this, is going to look at, is inconsistent definitions within township ordinances. And it just makes sense.
And this is consistent.
Oh, it's,
Yeah.
but
It's-
I thought I heard you say that it was a combination of two things.
Well, under our whole open space definition in chapter 178, it has, I think, the first sentence of it, and then the other two sentences are in another section. So it is consistent, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it should just be the same definition everywhere.
Well, that'll probably be a later amendment to Saldo that we're going to do, just to take this and copy and paste it. It is in the body of Saldo, exactly what this says verbatim.
All right. And then about the issue of who are residents and who can have access. I mean, that seems like something that needs to be addressed and can't be left sort of ambiguous.
Well, I would lean on Barbara Kirk for that one. I mean, to me, residents, how would you define that? Aren't residents? I mean, how do you define residents?
Well,
Who has access to
I
land?
mean,
It's really the
it's
question.
residents, like, it's always gonna be, like you're saying, I think what you're saying is, it's going to be enjoyed by some residents, but depending on the situation, it might not be available to all residents, but it'll be available to a predetermined set of residents.
correct. It could be public versus private, in that, generally speaking, if there is going to be a homeowners association or things of that nature, you have bylaws and rules and regulations that have to be reviewed by the township that will limit access to open space. And the homeowners association would be the one to police that with the signage and things of that nature. If it is public open space, similar signage can be posted saying this is open to the entire township, or something, to that akin. I don't know if you can just specifically define residents, but during the course of reviewing the plans, make that differentiation as to whether it's going to be only for those in that development or open to the entire public.
And
Can't we
and
just the distinction that you just said, public versus private open space?
I don't know that it's appropriate to make the distinction. I mean, just to raise the point that this is private land that right now somebody owns, right? That I can't go walk around on without their permission. And if they are to develop that land and preserve some of it as open space for soil erosion, to create an environment for animals and other things, I don't know that necessarily we should specify in the code that they have to let anybody from the township go take a stroll on that private land.
I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm saying
Yeah.
we need to, the ordinance should say that it needs to be clearly designated,
Yeah.
either public open space or private open space.
And it is in the subdivision land development section of the ordinance. Yeah, I have it up on the screen, preliminary plan, lands, or preliminary plan for open lands.
Is there something on open space, like all of these open space, whether it's private or public, but something that falls under the township's definition of open space? And when we kind of assess where our open space is and our percentages as a township and everything, is there a signage requirement that we have?
Yeah, that is something that is, I believe, in our ordinance that we have a sign somewhere.
Yeah, like, so that
Yeah.
sign could say private open space, or, not open to public, or whatever. Like, so it's clear to someone, at least when they walk up, that it's, whether I can go on it or not.
Right.
But
And our ordinance kind of leaves it up to the developer if they can choose, with the township's input, of course, whether or not to dedicate land to us. We can accept that dedication, or if we feel we don't want to do it, we could leave it to them to make their own homeowners association, dedicated to a conservancy of some kind, or some other organization that is viable to have it. And there's all sorts of requirements that are in the ordinance about how you do that, what paperwork you have to provide. And all of that stuff is outlined pretty clearly in our
Yeah.
subdivision land development
And, like,
ordinance.
the only reason I bring this up is because, I know we probably have defined open space right now that's not open to the public. It's probably in some area, like we don't want people going in there. Maybe it's not safe. I don't know. Near the railroad track. I don't know what we have, but there could conceivably be open space that the township owns, but we don't necessarily want people just walking through it all the time.
Adrian.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. I mean, the number one example of open space that the township owns is Patterson Farm.
Yeah.
Well over 100 acres of open space that's a working farm. And we have signage all over it, authorized personnel only, because it's a working farm. And if somebody doesn't watch what they're doing, they could get run over by a front end loader or a tractor or something. So that's exactly
Yeah.
right. And the code specifies that already.
Okay.
All that I would like to see is that, the remaining open space that we have that's developable, that is reserved a certain amount for open space, and we can shrink the lots accordingly. But I'm also in total agreement that we don't end up with 8-acre lots on R1 zoning just to have 40-50% open space. I'm with you on that. And I don't think it's a big reach to put in the code that the limit will be for R1 zoning, we'll say 30%, and for R2 zoning, 25%, or whatever you want to do, because you don't want postage size lots. So if that's what I'm hearing, I don't think the board would disagree with you.
Yeah.
And I think it's an easy fix to put those limits in to this amendment.
Yeah, and like for me personally, that would make me, I think I've made that clear over the however many conversations we had about this. That would make me more comfortable. I totally understand what the board is trying to accomplish and what Jim's trying to accomplish here. So I know I'm probably pushing back on this more than maybe people want me to, but I just want to make sure if we do this, we get it right. This is something new. And you just want to make sure that when it's touted by the township as a positive, as it starts happening, that people actually take it as a positive.
And I think people have reacted very positively to all the cluster development that we've done in the northern part of the township. You drive through, you have those open areas that, they're just open. And for a lot of people, that's one of the complaints, like, oh my God, they're putting in lots everywhere. Why isn't there any open area left? And this ordinance provides that opportunity.
I totally get it. I just, sometimes I get a little cynical by nature, and that's through experience. And I know that if there's a way to take advantage of the nth degree that you can't anticipate, somebody's going to come along and try and do that. And all I'm trying to do is that's all. And I think that's what Fred just echoed. What I've been trying to say is just put a floor on it that doesn't put us in a situation we don't want. That's it. It may never come to fruition. Nobody ever may come close to it, but I'd rather have that while we're drawing this up. Why not put that protection in it while we're thinking about it? That's my perspective on it.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that, you tasked me with was to go through and go through a number of examples to see what happened. And if you'd like, I can continue on that, or if you wanted to go through a few more items, Tony.
That's great.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, so let me share another one I did for a property in the R1 zoning district. And these numbers are kind of approximate. They're not exact, but I think they're fairly close. Here's a theoretical 106-acre property with hardly any resource protected land. It's basically, there's no streams, floodplains, wetlands, woods. It's about as clean for development as you can get. Under our current zoning, you could theoretically get 100 lots out of that, or although I like to always say, you're never going to get that theoretical, because you do have to build roads and detention basins. And that would have no open space, zero. Theoretically, they could develop the entire thing. They could do a fee in lieu of recreation land. For this instance, if they If they did do recreation land, they can, I think it's 2,200 square feet per lot. So for 100 lots, that's about 22,000 square feet. That would be about 4 acres of open space we would get out of it if they did do recreation land and chose to do a pocket park or something like that. If you do the 25% open space, now we're going to get 26 acres of open space on this piece of property. They'll still have 80 acres roughly left over, and their lot yield will be 94 to 99. So it's about maybe less than a 10% difference in density. However, they're going to benefit in that they'll be able to shorten the amount of roads they build, shorten the amount of utilities. To our benefit as a community, we would get probably 15 to 20% less impervious surface generated by doing this. If they chose to go with a higher amount of open space, they could go ahead and get a few more lots, but it doesn't really drastically increase as they go up. They do get a little bit of a benefit, but you reach a point of diminishing returns with giving us open space versus another property that has more resources, like about 20% natural resources. They could theoretically get about 67 to 70 lots out of that. It may be a little bit less when they get around to it with the roads and everything. Now, when they give us open space, we would gain to get up to the 25% minimum open space, which would include those natural resources plus additional land. We'd gain an extra approximately 5 acres of land. They could theoretically get about 10% more number of lots out of this on this one piece of property. And as they give us more open space, that number stays roughly the same. They get a little bit of extra bonus as we gain open space.
How can they build more? Went from 77 to 79?
It's smaller lots, right? They're
Yeah.
allowed to have smaller lots if they choose to preserve more common space as
Right.
open.
So they would have smaller lots like all of the other lots that are built in the northern end of the township.
I mean, all right, so if you scroll back up to the original, the one you just had, the one we were just looking at, like right there, 70, if they don't do anything, they can get 77 homes on there at whatever is allowed in our current zoning, right? And then you just went to the next one and they gave us 30%, but they somehow got an extra 2 houses on that on less land. Did I get that? Did I read that wrong? Yeah. You went 77 to 79.
That is correct.
That doesn't make sense to me. You shouldn't be able to get more. I get you're giving them their 77 and you're giving them less land to put it on. But why are they now we're taking less land and we're allowing them to actually put 2 more houses that they wouldn't have been allowed if they had the full 70, if they had the full, didn't give us any. I don't, that doesn't make sense to me.
Well, that's the carrot for them. To give us more land, they're going to get an extra 2 lots out of it. The lots might be a little smaller in size, but still within the allowance that we have in the ordinance. And we're trading, you give us land, we'll give you more lots. And you see, it's an extra 2 lots. It's not anything major. This was a request, I think, early on, we just had 25% as the standard. And we are tasked with, well, can't they go higher? What if we did 30% or 35%? I forget which supervisor had requested that, but that was one of the supervisors that said, why stop at 25? What if they want to give us 30 and we give them a few more lots?
Yeah, I think there are other township codes that need to come into play in that decision-making process. It's not a one-off decision. There's other factors. And I love open space. It's the reason I started going to board of supervisors meetings. So it's like, I'm not anti-open space at all. I'm not.
You're anti more open space.
No, I am anti, we've spent a lot of money and effort over the past, just in the 10 years that 10, 12 years, I've really been paying attention, involved in this town. And the master plan goes back way before that. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that go into our master plan. And I get that we have variances and we make individual decisions based on specifics, but this essentially leaves us open to fundamentally changing the nature if you don't put the right controls around it. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. So it's like, so if you keep going, then somebody gives 70% and you're in a neighborhood, where that's not what we had designed in our master plan, all of a sudden you now got this really dense neighborhood in the middle of something that's completely different. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a neighborhood like that. I may choose to live in a neighborhood like that. So I'm not trying to denigrate that at all, but I'm just saying, does that belong in the same neighborhood that we have defined over the past several decades of this is what this neighborhood in general should feel like? That's all. I think it's a fair question.
I think the one thing that maybe if I could, we're not changing the yard setbacks. You're not changing the side yard setbacks, front yard setbacks, rear yard setbacks from the underlying zoning district. And so I think that provides a measure of keeping the lot sizes honest, so to speak.
Okay. Well, I get it. I think I'm probably, I'm not intending to dominate. This is just something that I feel kind of strongly about. I'm not going to say anymore. I think everyone knows where I'm coming from on this. And I'm going to let other people talk.
I mean, I was going to say, I used to live in Northern Virginia, and there's some neighborhoods you can extend your hands and walk between two houses and touch the siding. So, I think that certainly that's what we're looking at. I do have a question though on the concerns around increasing the density. And I get it, right? The master plan, a lot of work went into that. Is the concern the total number of population in an area? Is it the look of a neighborhood from the main streets? Is there?
The way I look at it is like, this is my opinion. This is not,
Sure.
Listen. I do this and I'm sitting on my hands on purpose. Oh, sorry. Now I'm gonna let someone else answer that. I'm talking too much.
And actually on my screen, I can show you like two different examples. Up in the northern end of the township, where it's the 1 acre zoning, we have the Dolington Estates development where you can see it's just all lots. There's no open space at all, versus the farmland preservation lots, which I think there's about 500 or 600 lots up in the northern end of the township that have been built that way. Here they're clustered down, and yet they have the open space all around them. So it's not unprecedented at all in the northern end of the township.
So we're not contemplating, when you're talking about open space, farmland preservation, are you, or is that part of what this is incorporates?
No, farmland preservation is a separate entity.
Okay, so that's not, I know I understand that, because I only bring that up because increasingly going forward in the future, there's going to be very challenging to have people farm that property, and that's been increasingly a problem. So we don't want to go down that path and add more farmland when we're not going to have farmers. I mean, I just think we're creating problems doing that.
That's a separate animal altogether.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine. I only mentioned it because you showed that example. So that's not really the example we'd be looking at. That would be
but it would
either
be open space.
right, open space of some sort. So getting back to open space, public versus private open space, usable open space. If it's open to the, I guess, if something is resource protected open space, I think we'd want to have it fenced in. I don't think just having the bushes there does it. You walk around this town, I walk my dog all over the place, and I know you said it's in older developments, and it is, it's more prevalent, but it's in newer developments too. You walk around this town and open space is encroached on everywhere, and often it's resource protected open space. And if we're gonna do that, let's put up fences. Maybe they're attractive looking fences, I'm not talking about like chain link fences, but something other than just a few small bushes that can sort of, people can mow their lawn, go around with their lawnmower and extend their yard by 30 yards or something like that.
Actually, when we passed that part of the ordinance, I think 15 years ago now, that was one of the discussion items we had. And I recall one of the concerns with fences was, well, who's going to own the fence? Who's going to maintain the fence? Are we going to put it on township land? Then we're going to be required to maintain it, which we don't have the capability of doing it. If we put it on private land, then we're forcing them to own and maintain the fence. And there was support for that, but then there were other people who just didn't like that idea of enforcing a fence on someone. But however, that doesn't mean that wasn't the right way to go. It's just at that time, it was too many what ifs that we just said, let's not do that.
That's a very legitimate concern. Expense. I mean, but if we're going to take, 25% of a property, say it, and it's all resource protected, it's not going to be usable by anybody, we should require a fence to make sure it is actually maintained as resource protected property. If it's 25% of a, and I don't know how many large properties would have that kind of resource protected land. Maybe there's 100 acres and it's got 10 acres of resource protected, 10 contiguous acres, whatever. We put a fence around that.
That would be in subdivisional land development ordinance. That's typically not a zoning ordinance, but that is something we can definitely.
I'm raising it now because we're addressing now open space, resource protected lands, which may or may not be included in 25% of preserved lands that we're telling somebody they can't build on. Again, that's why I'm raising it now. I think now's the appropriate time to raise it. I mean, it either gets included and addressed now, or it'll never get addressed, or it'll be addressed piecemeal in 3 years when it's too late. That's the reason to bring it up now.
Okay.
Jim, my comment is, or question, if this open space, if it's for public use, who maintains it? Do we have to maintain it then as a township, or does the neighborhood maintain it?
Open space in general, there's the option of someone dedicating the open space to the township. If it's dedicated to the township owns it and maintains it. If it's kept in private ownership, either as a homeowners association, a conservancy, or some other group that the requirements which are outlined under our subdivision land development ordinance, then they would have the responsibility for owning it and maintaining it. At the time they do that, typically they do a declaration of restrictions and covenants, I believe it's called, Barbara. And at that time, that is reviewed by the township to make sure they have sufficient protections in there for the township to enforce that.
All right, thank you.
And that all is decided during the meetings with the developer and deciding how they're going to do the preliminary and final plan. So the process of determining whether it's going to be private or public or third party will all be determined. It's already in the books how that's done. This ordinance, this amendment to the ordinance, all that does is for the township to insist that X percent of the developable or the land will be an open space portion, and the lots will be smaller thereof. And I still agree with Adrian. I don't see the need to have more lots. I can understand smaller lots to an extent, But I think and I think the Board of Supervisors will agree with me that the carrot is less asphalt, less cement, more pervious surface in the development, which means less expense to the developer. And I think the board would not look, present or future board would not look kindly to adding more lots to a smaller buildable area. But the concept of dedicating 25% or so to open space is something the board would like to have, especially since there's so few developable lots left in the township. I mean, realistically, the board's looking at millions of dollars in expenditures to buy open space versus getting it from the builder for in trade for a slightly smaller lot build. So, when you look at it from a pragmatic standpoint, this is a way to get open space without township paying for it.
Fred, to follow up on that comment, that would suggest that the open space that's contemplated in this ordinance would be public open space. Because as opposed to private open space, because if you're talking about apples to apples and the township spending money to buy open space, presumably that would be as public open space.
Well, I'm being loose with the words, and I don't disagree with you, Tony. But if you look at some of the townhouse developments in Lower Makefield, there's acres and acres of enjoyable open space by the general public, but it's private property. You walk down, you go by the dog park, that's surrounded basically by a homeowners association. You look at Rose Hollow, you look at Palmer Farms. These are all clustered developments and higher density housing that have open space areas, but it's private land. But it's enjoyed by the township in that it's open space. It's hard for me to say that it has to be public open space. When you're driving by it, you're seeing green space instead of cement. I think that's a good thing, whether it's in private hands or public hands. Does it really matter that you're going by the Wright farm, you see all this nice agricultural area, but it's private property, but it's enjoyed by the town in general, and then anybody who goes through the bypass, or on 332, or on Lindenhurst.
Yeah, we
It's
have
nice
bought
open space.
development rights also, so
Yeah,
that are privately owned.
that's all I'm saying. But with the 1,000 acres we have left of developable space, it would be nice if we could protect some of it without spending millions and millions of dollars of taxpayer money. We're going into debt for generations just for a few acres of open space. This tries to address that issue.
Jim, how much public open space do we currently have in the township?
We have a lot. That public open space is in a number of forms. We have natural areas such as 5 Mile Woods. We have natural areas such as 5 Mile Woods, resource protected lands spread throughout a number of developments throughout the township. We have farmland preservation, which is actually controlled by the Farmland Preservation Corporation. We have open space in the form of parks throughout the township. We have open space, which doesn't meet our current definition of open space in our ordinance, but we have a lot of stormwater management areas, which are township-owned lands that are open. I can't remember the number offhand. I'm thinking like it's 1,000 acres that we own.
But what percentage or how much of that is for public use?
I'd say probably 2/3 of that is for public use. The areas that have not been dedicated to the township that are privately owned open space, there's not as much of that. It's maybe 100 acres or so.
Does that 2/3 include the golf course?
I did not include the golf course. I always forget that one. That's another 200 acres.
Big chunk of property.
And so by doing this, are you looking to, what kind of open space are you really contemplating preserving? Is it more, private to particular development or public use overall?
Well, I think it kind of depends on which property you're talking about. Some properties abut open space that we already own and control, or they abut areas that are natural lands. Some areas might be along major roadways where if they cluster the development and keep the houses set back from the roadways, if we use money that we have in the tree bank to reforest those areas, it'll create like a nice visual buffer. So when you drive down the road, you don't just see house after house after house, but you can see open lands. And then beyond that, you see houses sort of through the trees. So there's a lot of ways we could do it. Small scale recreational areas can be put in. For a neighborhood, they could put a tot lot in the middle of their neighborhood. There's lots of ways to do open space, and in Lower Makefield, we've pretty much done about every way you can think of.
But to me, I think if you're talking about whatever's left developable in the town, that you're probably talking about mostly private open space. What do you think?
Not necessarily. It's something that is sort of a choice between the township and the developer. Obviously, the developer controls what they could do with it, but I think in many instances, they would just love to give it away to the township if they could. In other cases, I think they'd like to maintain it under their control. If they have a certain standard they like to have for how it's maintained and what it's going to be, look like and all that stuff.
This is going to sound like a silly question, but in the zoning code today, we have both open space and common open space as definitions. And this all just explores changing the definition of open space, which currently says C common open space. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And are we going to strike common open space and have one definition, or copy the text?
Common open space is actually a definition that is contained within multifamily housing. So it's a distinct, separate definition. And that was one of the conflicts we had, that one conflicted. It conflicted. So that's why we went with, let's go with what was in the subdivision land development ordinance, because that was the more recent one that we adopted, and make sure it's consistent there. And then common open space is just a slightly different animal.
Sure.
Okay. Does anyone have anything else? Okay, so what's the next, well, go ahead.
Only other comment I'd have is if we could get things like this in advance of the meeting, because we were just handed this tonight and we've talked about this at 3 or 4 other meetings. And it would be helpful to have a chance to review it before coming in here.
The only other comment I have is that I think that, as Adrian, you were talking about, you need controls for minimum lot size and increase in maximum density for each project.
I'm sorry, Don, I turned my mic off. I didn't quite catch what you said. You were breaking up a little bit.
Oh, I said, well, you were talking all along about how you were concerned about, developers taking advantage of this situation. So I think along what you were saying all along is that we should have controls for minimum lot size and increase in the particular, maximum density.
Yeah, that would make me feel immensely better.
I also agree with that.
I think to Tony's point, it does seem like it would be a good time if these changes are going to be made to look at beefing up enforcement around encroachment and protected lands at the same time to make sure that we're handling them kind of as one issue. So I think that would support that as well.
So the board is aware, we've already started implementation of enforcement. I've been working with the township code officer, identifying the problem areas and trying to get those issues resolved.
So.
Out of curiosity, does the township have some sort of, is there, how is the township identifying those locations?
Aerial photos and then visual personal inspections.
Is the township looking at every property, or is this when someone makes a complaint?
Both. They started identifying certain, obviously if a complaint is rendered, it has to be investigated, but the township is also starting to do a review of all its township-owned properties via aerial photos, as well as if there appears to be an encroachment, an actual inspection at the property to see if that the aerial photo is accurate. And then notices of violation are being sent to the, offending property owner.
Okay, so just walk us through this. Somebody has decided to co-op 25 feet of resource protected land behind their house. They started, planted grass, put in trees, shrubs, whatever. Maybe they put a structure on it, maybe they didn't. What happens?
Most of them are dealing with structural issues. So I will give you an example. In one of the older developments, an aerial photo showed a picture of what appeared to be a chicken coop type structure on township land. And it was confirmed that it existed, and notice was sent to the property owner about having to remove it. And since I haven't heard any further word of seeking enforcement, I believe the property owner complied and removed the offending structure. So it's that process that we're working on.
And in those instances where there are no structures, it's just somebody's co-opted land.
Well, it's kind of hard to prove land that's co-opted. Generally, you see structures encroaching on the land as opposed to somebody planting trees and things of that nature.
Well, planting trees, we usually aren't that upset with.
Yeah.
It's the cutting down of trees, and we actually have aerial photography that goes back to the 1930s that help us look at it. The other day, we actually had someone who thought that the neighbor had gone into the open space, and we reviewed the aerials going all the way back, and the lots all hugged resource protected land except for this one lot where somehow the farm field jutted out about 50 or 60 feet beyond their lot. And they do cut the grass back there, but it's been like that for 40 years. So that's how we check that. Historical aerial photographs also.
And if we were particularly worried moving forward about new developments, encouraging the adoption of an HOA, I've lived under HOAs before. They're pretty strict about enforcement, especially if the township has strict fines on them. So that could be a way to protect resource protected land without us paying for fencing and putting that onus on the homeowners.
And Mr. Collin, another thing that we've been doing, where I've been insisting when I appear, it's specifically at zoning hearings, and there's issues with respect to natural resources, I've been insisting that there be a deed restriction recorded so that there's something clearly of record to prevent any further development on a natural resource protected area. And something similar could be done for open space as well.
Yeah, I kind of assumed that something like that would be in there for this, right?
It is.
It hadn't been done always. So Barbara actually took the lead on that. And I think we're in a better place going forward because of that.
Good deal.
And we can always beef up code enforcement as time goes by, as the township gets better and better at these issues. But regarding moving forward with this ordinance, the board is going to address this tomorrow, Wednesday. So, and from what I'm hearing, when I go, at the board meeting on Wednesday, we're having the same conversation we had at the last meeting, and we don't seem to have resolution on the matter. So, if I may, using Adrian's concerns, would the commission have a problem with a 30% max in open space with a corresponding 30% in lot size reduction and no increase in number of lots? Is that something that would sound acceptable to the commission? And believe me, you can change that any way you want. I'm just putting it out there.
It's it definitely gets in the direction of what I've been talking about, and I can't again, it may be different by R1 versus R2 versus R3. I mean, I'm not that schooled enough in those specifics, but something along those lines, Fred, I would be very amenable to. That's all I've been asking for, is just some sort of control on the extreme end of this thing to make sure we keep it in an area that the township would anticipate.
Barbara,
Jim, is that?
just if I could, Barbara, you had at one point if I remember in one of our earlier conversations about this, said that it would not be possible to have different percentages in different residential zoning areas. Is that, am I remembering that correctly, or am I wrong?
Well, that was the original concept, because it could be challenged more easily as being differentiating between different zoning districts. And certain zoning districts are built out to the point where there's not going to be anything available anyway. So the theory was to try to keep it consistent, a consistent percentage across the board. So it didn't appear that you were requiring greater open space preservation in, say, R1 versus an R2 district.
Well, saying percentage of the land versus acreage in itself, does that answer that?
Yeah, I thought that's what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
But instead of doing specific different calculations for each zoning district, trying to keep it equal across the board so there wouldn't be as much of a chance of a challenge.
And I think maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but each zoning district is slightly different. R1 is a lower density.
Yes, yeah, that was
Okay.
what I was getting at. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah. So R2 is slightly higher density, R3 is slightly higher.
Yeah, and I take that to mean is like, in the master plan, we had a vision of different types of neighborhoods. And some might be for younger people, some might be for, whatever the rationale for it is, but there's a definite rationale behind our different R1, R2, and R3. And I think we should just make sure when we're making something that could fundamentally change that, we're just aware of, where's the limit of that. That's all.
To Fred's question, if we don't trade additional lots, right, for the additional preserved space, is that still a perceived benefit to a builder? Is that still going to result in an increase in preserved land for the township?
No, if they can't get an extra lot, why are they going to give you extra open space?
They can build half the roads that they were supposed to build.
That's
Quarter of the roads.
That's typically not enough of an incentive unless the site layout just suits that.
So you're saying that property values would decrease per property in a smaller lot, but with more open space surrounding it?
Well, no,
I don't think so.
no, actually, when you have open space near your lot, the value of your land typically goes up because you're gaining the benefit of having open areas.
So Jim, I'm thinking, why would a township offer more lots to a developer when a slightly smaller lot with, with more open space would give an incentive to charge more for the home that he's building and get more
Well, I
profit
think
thereby?
initially we had 25% as a number, and one of the supervisors had stated that, well, why can't we have more? Wouldn't 30% be better, or 40%? And that's why we did the sliding scale. If the thought is that we should just make it 25, we can just stick with our original idea and just make it 25.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't want to dictate a floor. What's acceptable to the commission to make it go forward instead of staying in this. I don't want to spin wheels for another year. I mean, I'm happy to take the agenda item off on Wednesday if the commission wants to fine tune the ordinance between now and next month. But if we're going to have this conversation forever, then I think I'll let the board of supervisors figure it out. And I kind of totally understand what Adrian's saying, that we don't want to have 10th acre lots with 80% open space. That I could see that in some areas, especially maybe the Gray Nun lot. If Holy Redeemer decides to do something creative with basically a townhouse development in the center with quads somewhere else, saying, okay, we'll have 50 acres of open space, but then we're going to have a big campus in the middle, nothing but concrete and houses. I don't know if that'll go well with the residents of the township. I think
everyone here is misunderstanding something. The lot sizes will be no different than they would be in most of the developments in the northern in the township. My development, my lot is, I think, 19,000 square feet. I have one of the more bigger lots. A lot of those lots are 16,000 square feet. And if you actually look at the ordinance, this is what is in there. So there's really essentially little difference in this. The only difference is that instead of 1 acre lots, we're going down to half acre lots and gaining the open space. We're not going down to townhouse level.
I will say when I was moving back to the township a couple of years ago, when we saw properties that backed up on open space, it was incredibly attractive to me, right?
Yeah.
That I could pay a smaller tax footprint because I've got less acreage, but I get the benefit of enjoying looking out my backyard and seeing all that extended land. I mean, listen, my perspective on it, not having been in the issue for several months, is if we want to do status quo, that's fine. The scenarios that Jim illustrated, just adding a small number of lots in exchange for a relatively significant increase in protection of open space, it allows us more flexibility working with the developer to shield potential new developments from the streets, the roads, right? To set things behind a screen of trees, et cetera. It seems attractive to me. As Jim outlined it.
I will say, and I just want to be 100% clear, the concept is attractive. Like it is. I am getting into the weeds because if we don't get into this weed now and it becomes an issue later, we're not going to get back into it again.
Is there
To do it.
Is there any way just to move it, I guess, past, because it seems like we're just at an impasse, to state somehow that we all acknowledge, the open space plan, but in order to move it forward, we want some type of limitations on it, it's either percentages or something, and let the board of supervisors kind of decide that instead of us deciding what percentage it is or how much space there is. I mean, I think overall, all of us like the idea of the open space. I guess we're just getting really tied up in just to find details of how much space, how many houses, how big the lots are. So maybe that's just something that the board of supervisors need to kind of discuss between themselves, maybe, and not us.
They can, but our job is to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors on the proposed amendment to the ordinance. And the devil's in the detail in this particular case. So I don't know. I hear what you're saying, but I think we got to either reach a consensus tonight or reach a consensus at the next meeting and move it forward and let them handle it after that. But we need to make a recommendation at some point, or not make a recommendation. And
Well, what I'm, excuse me, Tony, I'm sorry to interrupt.
if I can just have one more minute, Fred.
Go ahead,
One more
sure.
one more second. The other thing I thought, which I don't know if it would be helpful or not. I don't know if any neighboring or other communities in Bucks County have this type of ordinance already in place. Jim, is that something that you're aware of, or is that?
Yes, Barbara Kirk had actually looked into that.
Okay.
And a lot of our ordinances modeled after that. Many of them have much higher densities in their cluster ordinance, which we thought were not suitable for Lower Makefield. Though.
Okay, so what municipalities are we talking about, and what densities are we talking about? Just so we have an idea.
I don't have that information off the top of my head. I will tell you that one that sticks in my mind is Buckingham Township, but it appears, based on my review, that the open space regulations imposed in the township, Buckingham Township, was in response to a variety of challenges to the overall ordinance. So as part of settling matters, they made modifications. Northampton was similar to us. I believe Newtown Township was similar. I just don't remember the numbers of the density, and I just don't have it here with me.
Okay, because I think that the percentages, just to have an idea of what they're doing, might be helpful for us.
I think when we've reached a consensus of using a 25% requirement, it was akin to what was seen in other nearby ordinances in Bucks County and within our area, and rather than actual like acreage type thing.
Northampton Township, if I remember, was 25%. I lived in Northampton Township for 30 years. And I lived up above, as I lived in a cluster development where the half-acre lots became third-acre lots. And that extra, that was incorporated into open space.
Well, why don't we just say 25% then?
I think that's what we originally started, but I think the commission was concerned about density.
Yeah, if you put 25% overall, can you put a limit on the increase in maximum density per zone?
I don't see why not, but I would recommend, again, it go across the board. I would have to rely on Mr. Majewski for those numbers and calculations. He has that information more readily available to him than I do. But I mean, you could do something like preservation of land. You could use the same numbers. You could do a requirement that there be 25% preserved open space, but lot size cannot be reduced by 25% without open space, or something similar. Mr. Majewski?
I'm thinking.
Is there? Oh, God, I hope not.
Well, let's do it this way. The next commission is meeting April 10th. Why don't we try to have something crafted using a 25% calculation and somehow put something in there to limit the lot size reduction to submit to the board? And at that point, you either say you like the 25% number or you don't like the 25% number, and then it can be submitted to the supervisors for their review.
But does that address the maximum density?
That's what I'm saying. We would include something that would address the maximum density in the revised version. The original version did not limit the maximum amount for the density.
But it did address minimum lot size.
I believe so.
So what I'll do, if there's consensus from the commission, is I will take the re-advertisement agenda item that we have scheduled for Wednesday. I will postpone that until the April meeting. And then between now and the April meeting, hopefully we'll get something together that the commission can make a recommendation. Does that sound okay to you guys?
Okay.
That does sound good. The one other item, just, and I don't really have a solid thought about it, but just addressing the resource protected land, maybe through an HOA that has a fence up that's responsible for it. If the significant, and I don't know how you do this, but if of the 25% of the land, if it's a situation where the majority of it, maybe it's more than half is resource protected, that there's a fence around it in an HOA. I don't know if we can do that, if that's something that you can look
don't
I
know.
think if Barbara can figure that out, we'll be happy to put that in for next month.
Yeah, but I don't know
that-
if we can impose that kind of requirement upon lands that are being privately maintained.
We can encourage them to very strictly enforce the protection or face thoroughly steep fines, right? I mean, that's.
Well,
and
that
we
could
might
be,
find them maintaining a fence.
subject to argument. I would,
Yeah.
But does it have to be fencing? Could it be like signage and or fencing?
Well,
Where's
there
living,
already
where's
is a
living hedges or
signage.
living barriers? I think, from my experience over the last 6 years, when a developer comes to the township with plans, by the time it reaches the public, it's pretty well modified. So, personally, I'm not too concerned about how we're going to address the open space, more than that we need the open space and would like to have the open space, and we can work on enforcing the open space. But I don't think that's part of this, would be part of it. But then if Barbara thinks it can be incorporated, then I'm all for it, and I think the board would be, amenable to something like that. So we have a month now to figure it out.
But the more I'm thinking about it, I like the idea of just picking a number we're very comfortable with, a sort of a limit. Look, we're not strangers to developers asking for exceptions. And if somebody comes in and says, hey, 25%, here's my plan, I can do it with 30, I'm willing to give you this, you come back and you do it like they do it with everything else.
Well, that would be a variance they'd have to go.
Yeah.
through, and they'd
All
have
right,
to,
that's
they'd have to prove a hardship. And giving us more open space, I don't know, rise to the level of a hardship.
So if I can interrupt, what is the general consensus as to how we maximize the amount of density? Cannot be increased by more than 25%, cannot be increased by more than 15%.
I mean, I would defer, like, right now, I'd like my first person I'm looking at is Jim, is like, what's enforceable? Right? Like how, what's a way you can do this that doesn't make it completely onerous on a developer to figure out and for us to make sure that what they're telling us is accurate? You understand what I'm saying? Like, if it's a percentage, if it's a specific number, if it's a, like, whatever.
Well,
And
if it's supposed to
if
be,
it doesn't matter, then it doesn't matter.
if it's supposed to be minimal, then I don't think you could do more than 10 to 15%.
That wouldn't work. You want significant open space, so I would say at least 25%, and then if we could go to 30%.
No, you're afraid you're missing the question.
Yeah.
We got minimum of 25% open space, but the commission wants to maximize the increase in the density. If 25% open space, are we saying the maximum density can't be increased by any more than 10 or 15% is what I'm trying to figure out.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
We'll let the pros figure that out, and then come
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
commission next month.
Like, I'm open. I have no idea what that specific number should be. But I feel like there should be a number there.
But we can review the other township open spaces and probably come up to something that would fit Lower Makefield. Can we do that in a month?
I just don't think, I don't know if it's the other township ordinances actually dealt with the maximum on the density. I don't remember seeing that, but I will double
I
check.
think Northampton did, but you can figure it, yeah.
I can double check.
Yeah. Because I remember the township having a big argument over it when it was first,
Northampton had big arguments over everything.
but I know
Okay.
at this part, we know what people want in our township, even though we can't go back to 1930.
Mhm.
Yeah,
We can get the illusion of it, so.
Okay.
Great. All right, so I know what to tell the board on Wednesday. I got my instructions. Thank you.
Just be clear, I hope, and I'm speaking for me, not for everyone, but I think everyone agrees with me. This is not, I don't think this is, should be interpreted as an opposition to the concept by the planning commission. I think conceptually, everyone.
No, this is clarification. This is context. This is
Devils in details.
and it's I'm sure we've all talked to neighbors and friends and we've gotten some kind of idea of what should be, but we just got to we're in the process of making new law here, so it's good to be as clear as we can so that we don't make mistakes down the road. That's all. I got it.
Yep. Thanks, Fred.
This is how it should be.
All right.
I appreciate it.
Does anybody have anything else? I don't think obviously we weren't voting on anything right now, right? I do. Oh, public comment? Any public comment? Thanks. All right. This was just for us. All right. So if nobody has anything else on this, there's nothing else on the agenda, so I'll take a motion to adjourn if someone wants to do it.
Make a motion that we adjourn.
Any seconds?
Second.
Before you
I think
before you
that
say
was a
anything
tie.
else, before you say anything else, hold on, Adrian. I'm sorry.
All
I
right.
think this is Dawn's last meeting.
Oh,
So I want to thank
forgot.
Dawn for her service on the planning
thanks for
commission
reminding me, Fred.
and good luck in whatever you decide to do next.
Thank you. I won't actually be in the area on April 10th anyway, so.
Well, we
right.
appreciate your attendance and I thank you for the board.
Enjoyed
Thank
working
you.
with you, Dawn. Enjoyed it.
Thanks.
All
You
right.
as well.
All right. Let's adjourn.
Bye-bye. Thanks all.
Good night.